everybody. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for this conference. I always begin by apologising for the world I'm about to introduce most of you to. This is a world that most of you, for very good reason, probably avoid. However, our children cannot avoid it. So what I'm going to do is to bring you into the world that kids live in. How many of you here have children? All right, so you'll all be running, screaming for the doors soon, so just keep still while I go through this. So I'm going to tell you about the life that your kids live in. And for most of you here, when I look at you, and here I'm being nice, I'd say most of us are over the age of 35. And that means we were brought up in a print-based generation, where the dominant form of communication was the printed word. Our kids are image-based. That is, the dominant form of communication is the image, which has reshaped the way that kids now deal with information. Those of us who were brought up with the print-based information developed some immunization to the seduction of the eloquence of the printed word. There is no such immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the image. Let me give you an example. I'm going to talk about images of women in pop culture, and I'm going to explain to all of you that they don't exist, okay? That these images that I'm going to talk about, like her, she's not real, and she's not real. But no matter how many times I tell you that they're not real, how many women in this room will be comparing yourselves to those women? Right? Doesn't matter that she's not real. It feels real. So let me begin by introducing you to the fact that why most adults don't know the world of our children, the media does. This is a magazine called Details, which is a kind of cosmopolitan for men. They had an article called How Internet Porn is Changing Teen Sex. And they wrote, forget awkward fumblings in the back of the bus. Junior is thinking more along the lines of reverse cowgirl anal. I assume most of you at this point don't know what reverse cowgirl anal is, but you will by the end of the discussion. They then went on to say, they quoted a female pornographer, and she said something really interesting. She said, the girls these days, they just seem to come to the set porn ready. What does porn ready mean? What I'm going to say is that most of our girls all over the Western world are being socialized by this culture to be porn ready, even if they never go on a porn set. They're being socialized by a pornified culture to think about themselves in pornographic ways. And I'm going to explain what that means later. So, this magazine went on to say, there is an entire generation of young people who think sex ends with a money shot to the face. Who here knows what a money shot is? Or whatever the Polish translation is? Anyone? Okay, this is your standard porn movie. The money shot, and they call it the money shot because this is what makes money, is ejaculation on the face and into the eyes. This is the end of virtually every porn movie. And we're going to talk about the impact of that because what's happening is that on the porn set, women are getting gonorrhea of the eye because of the semen that is going into their eye. So we're going to talk about the emotional, the physical, and the medical impact of pornography. So let's wander through the pop culture world of your average 14-year-old girl and boy. And what you see are standard images of females, hypersexualized, and as you wander through, they just come at you again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. So let's look at the standard image. Blonde, white, young, and toned. So I want to introduce you to an idea in media theory. Have a look at how she's standing. Who is she looking at? And before you answer who she's looking at, Do you think she's looking at her mother saying, let's go for a cup of coffee after the photo shoot? Who's she speaking to? Men, am I right? And what is she saying? What is this? What's the message? One message over and over again. And that message, excuse my language, is fuck me. Now, what does it mean to live in a society when you are a boy growing up? Before you can even speak, every image of a female is saying fuck me, fuck me, fuck me. You begin to develop a sense of male entitlement, of ownership to women's bodies. And what does it mean to girls developing their adolescent sense of who they are, when every image tells them that they have to look fuckable? And if they don't look fuckable, then they're invisible. And these are the choices on offer to young girls today as they grow into adolescence. Fuckability or invisibility. And what are you going to do as an adolescent girl? You're not going to choose invisibility, because built in to the DNA of adolescence is the need to be visible. So this is how the media sets up young girls. It sets them up to see themselves as porn ready. So let's think, what does it mean to live in a world where your role models are Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, Kim Kardashian, or Paris Hilton? Think about your 12, 13, 14 female. She's wandering through the world. Now, I'm a sociologist, and we start from the assumption that your identity as a female is socially constructed. You wander through the culture thinking, what would it be like to be female? Now, when I was growing up, there was lots of images of how to be female. Today, there is one image, the fuckable image. And an example here is Paris Hilton. She got famous on her sex tape that was leaked by her ex-boyfriend against her will. He was 11 years older at the time and married. And she became an international star on the basis that her sex tape, which was against her will, was the best-selling porn movie for 2 years. Now, what happened to Paris Hilton is very interesting. And I'm going to talk about how this happens to our young girls and adolescent girls. She got branded a slut. Am I right? Same in Poland? Yes? No? Yeah, right? Now, Paris Hilton decided to say, you're going to call me a slut? I'm going to be the best slut you've ever seen. And was she? Yes. And you know why she could carry this off? Because her millions acted as an upmarket cleansing cream. But put this on a working class girl, put it on your average adolescent, the label slut, and she can't carry it like that. In fact, we now have longitudinal studies, data over a period of 20 years that follows girls who get labelled a slut in adolescence. And what we find is it destroys their life. It has increased alcoholism, increased drug abuse, early pregnancy, dropping out of school, depression and anxiety. In fact, when you get labelled a slut, what happens to you is very similar to what happens to rape victims. The same trauma that rape victims have, women and girls who get labelled a slut. So to be labelled a slut is in fact a collective rape of your identity. It is not funny to call girls sluts. It actually destroys their life. But now you see, girls are in an impossible situation. You have to look like a slut. And remember, there's no such thing as a slut. Slut is a term invented by a patriarchal society to control and police women's behaviour. But let's just use the term for the moment. So what happens is you are told in this society you have to look like a slut, you have to dress like a slut, you have to act like a slut, but don't get labelled a slut. But where is that line? And where do you cross it? Is it here? Is it here? And you don't get to decide if you've crossed that line. Who decides is an ex-boyfriend or a jealous girlfriend who goes on Instagram or Tumblr or Facebook and puts a whole page up to say, you're a slut. And then you live with the consequences. And we as adults are not protecting our kids against this form of violence. And it is a form of violence because, as I say, it is a collective rape of their identity. So let's take an example of Miley Cyrus. So Miley Cyrus started off as squeaky clean Hannah Montana. Was she big Hannah Montana here in Poland? For your daughters, right. So what happened is Miley Cyrus at 15 is beginning to age out of Hannah Montana. They have to rebrand squeaky clean Hannah Montana into fuckable Miley Cyrus. Because if she is going to be visible in the world of pop culture with Lady Gaga and Beyonce, squeaky clean is going to make her invisible. So it began on her 15th birthday in Vanity Fair with these images by Annie Leibovitz. 15 years old with bedhead wrapped in a towel with a fuck me look. Then this is with her father. Would you like to sit like that with your father? I wouldn't. And then Elle, a year later, at 16. And then the very famous twerking. Did you get the twerking here? Right, now this is twerking. This is Robin Thicke there, whose song is Blurred Lines. It seems that Robin Thicke is really thick because he doesn't know the difference between consent and rape. That's what the blurred lines are. So what happened the day after the twerking is that everybody's talking about Miley Cyrus as a slut. As if Miley Cyrus sat down and thought through her career for the next 10 years. Miley Cyrus is a commodity, owned and controlled by adults who have sat down and paced her trajectory of her life. And who does everybody call a slut? Her. The day after this, everyone was talking about her. I want to talk about Robin Thicke, 36-year-old father who is grinding in to an 18-year-old girl. Why do we never focus on the men in all of this? Why are we so obsessed with the women? Every question I get around pornography is, why do women do this? That's a no-brainer. You know why women do it? Because they're poor, and women will do anything to put food on the table for their children. My bigger question is, why do men look at porn? That's what we need to ask. The ones with the choices are the men. They can choose whether to look at porn or not. That's where choice comes in. And then we have, again, hypersexualizing more and more. And then we get into Vogue, where they use images of children. And then let's look at the effects. So I teach women's studies, and I have taught women's studies for 25 years. And about 8 to 10 years ago, I began to see a change in my students. And all of us who teach women's studies at conferences were saying, something is happening in the culture. We don't know what it is, but they're changing. Something's going on. And you know who really taught me what it was? It wasn't anyone with a doctorate in communications. It was actually an incarcerated rapist who was in prison for raping his 10-year-old stepdaughter. And I like to call him Dick. Now, Dick is in prison, and he is explaining to me how he groomed his stepdaughter. Now, grooming is very important. When a pedophile or a rapist picks their potential victim, they don't just go in and rape. They groom them. They buy them presents. They tell them how beautiful they are. They often find a vulnerable kid who is alone and isolated. And then they get to be friends with the kid. And the kid is starving for affection. And then when they've connected with the kid, then they move in for the kill, the rape. So Dick said to me, and he looked me straight in the face, and he said, the culture did a lot of the grooming for me. And I almost fell off my chair because I thought, that's it. That's the missing piece of the puzzle. The culture is mass perpetrating against our girls. It is getting them porn ready. It is denying them their authentic sexuality. It is denying them the right to choose when they are developmentally ready to engage in a sexuality that is theirs and that they have written and authored. Instead, we have a plasticized, generic, formulaic, industrialized sexuality being forced on our young girls. Now, this is perp culture part one, pop culture. Perp culture part two is the porn industry. This is where our boys are getting perpetrated against. And again, I'm going to have to apologize for the world that I'm about to introduce you to. Now, if you're thinking of pornography, forget Playboy, forget Penthouse, and even forget Hustler. These, and I say this, are the good old days. I never thought I would look back at these days with nostalgia. So what changed everything? The internet. In around 2000, when the internet became domesticated into homes, the internet made pornography affordable, accessible, and anonymous. The three things you need to drive demand. You no longer had to go to a porn shop. You could just click away from that. And this is where the change is. I want you to think of your generation or our father's generation. You'd find a Playboy, maybe a Penthouse. You'd masturbate to it. But you had limited access to how many Playboys you could steal before your father or your older brother realized that the pile was going down. Now, you've got one click away. Never before have we brought up a generation of boys with 24-hour access to pornography. This is a social experiment, the end of which is going to be written, and it's not going to be good. I can tell you that. Nobody knows how this is going to end. We're getting some insight now when we're seeing very violent rapes of young women by young men, when we're seeing sexting, when we're seeing rapes go up on YouTube and being basically catalogued on cell phones. Is there any other crime where the criminal tapes themselves actually doing the crime? Is there a bank robber who goes into a bank taking a selfie of himself as he's robbing a bank? Why do rapists continually take selfies of themselves? You know why? Because they're used to those images, because they get them from pornography. It makes sense when you realize the world that they live in. So let's first get into what pornography is. It is not a fantasy, it is not fun, it is not entertainment. It is a global industry. Now, this is from a pornographer, and he said a lot of people get distracted from the business model by the sex. Pornography, is just as sophisticated and multi-layered as any other marketplace. We operate just like any Fortune 500 company. It's like the tobacco industry, it's like the alcohol industry. You go after young people because when you get them as users, when they're young, you've got them for life. Now, when you think of who makes money from porn, you're probably thinking of Hugh Hefner, yes, maybe Larry Flint. This is the porn mogul of the world, Fabian Thyman. No one's ever heard of him, am I right? He transformed the porn industry. He was head of a company called Manwin, which is now called MindGeek. They threw him out last year because he got arrested for tax evasion. Out he was, and they changed their name from Manwin to MindGeek. This company owns 9 of the top 15 profitable porn sites in the world. The porn industry is now concentrated at distribution, and I'm going to explain why that's important later. But this is the man who transformed the industry, and nobody's ever heard of him. So MindGeek owns the free porn sites. And what I'm going to do is explain how that works as the business model. Some statistics. 36% of the internet is pornography. The online porn industry makes over $3,000 a second. 40 million regular consumers of online porn in the United States. 1 in 4 search queries is about teen. More than a third of all downloads are porn. Do you know what the most searched term is for porn? It's not slut porn. It's not anal porn. The most searched porn in the world is teen porn. 3 times more than any other search term. Teen porn, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. Porn businesses, like all businesses, raise capital, hire managers and accountants, have lobbying groups called the Free Speech Coalition, which I'll talk about later. They have PR firms, and the most important thing about the business is it interfaces with banks, credit card companies, venture capitalists, cable operators. It is now mainstream corporate global capitalism. Once you venture into global capitalism, that gives you cultural power, economic power, and political power. And what you have to understand is a lot of the messages you get about pornography, that it's fun, it's entertainment, is part of this massive PR machine that the porn industry sells you. You can be sure that most of what you read about pornography in the media, most of what you see on Polish television is a lie put forward by the PR machine. Their job, like every industry, is to make themselves look good. This is why you're not going to see often the truth behind the porn industry. Let me give you an example. Who's seen Lars and the Real Girl? Anyone? No, then I'm moving on. Right, okay, so let me show you how the porn industry works. This is one of the fathers of what we call gonzo porn, hardcore porn. I'm not going to read that, nobody's going to translate that, but if you read it at the bottom, you'll see what he says. Now, when I first came across Max Hardcore about 15 years ago, and I saw his films, I knew I was watching a sexual sadist. It was beyond anything. His images belonged on an Amnesty International site. Indeed, if he would have been torturing any group other than women, there would have been an outcry. But if you torture a woman and you call it sex, then all of a sudden it becomes fun and fantasy. So Max Hardcore helped found what is called gonzo porn. That's what the industry calls it, gonzo. This is your hardcore, in-your-face, cruel, violent porn. When I started to interview the pornographers 15 years ago, nobody would talk about Max Hardcore. They always said, he gives us a bad name, we refuse to discuss Max Hardcore. And then, when I went to the porn convention a few years ago in Las Vegas, the biggest porn convention in the United States, where 10,000 fans and me ended up one January, he had the biggest stall in the room with the most fans. He was front and center. That tells the story of porn. It has moved from the softcore Playboy and Penthouse to mainstream hardcore porn. So in porn, you don't have women, but you have sluts and whores and bitches. This is the kind of thing they call women. Why? Because the average man and boy masturbating to porn is not a sexual sadist. If he thought he was masturbating to cruelty and violence, his erection would go stone dead. So what you tell him is that the women in porn are not like any other women you've met. They're not like your mother. They're not like your sister. They're not like your girlfriend. They're a generation of women who stand apart from other women. Nothing like other women. It's not true. They are your sisters. They are your daughters. They are the women you love. But these women are poor. and they're poverty-stricken. And anyone here who is a mother will tell you, you will do anything if you're starving to feed your children. Absolutely anything. Including going into pornography and prostitution. And remember, pornography is prostitution with the camera going. It's the same industry. It's the sex industry. So, I'm going to now show you some of the scenes. One of the things that they accuse feminists of is that we always pick the worst. Well, I'm going to tell you that I don't pick the worst. I don't go near the worst. I follow the breadcrumbs of a 12-year-old boy without a credit card. So what I do is I put porn into Google and I just follow where he goes. No credit card. So I'm now going to introduce you into mainstream pornography. So you're 12 years old, you're male, you've got hormones raging, you've got an erection all the time and you don't know why, and you put porn into Google. What do you come up with? The thing you will come up with in virtually every single scene, no matter what you look, is gagging. This is where they put the penis so far down her throat that she's choking. And they put a lot of mascara on them. So the mascara is running down her face and she is choking. And when you watch it, if you've got empathy, you start to feel like you're choking as well. Now, what happens in here, and this is the 12-year-old boy watching this, as she's choking, the male, the porn performer, he doesn't take his penis out of her mouth. He grabs her head and drags it towards his penis even more. So she's choking even more. So she's got saliva, her nose is running, her eyes are running, and he's saying in a very clear voice, "Look me in the eye, look me in the eye," as she's choking. Now that's a sexual psychopath, you understand? Now whether he is a real sexual psychopath or not, I don't know. I'd have to do a study. What I do know is he behaves like a sexual psychopath. So our 12-year-old boys are learning their sexual cues from men who are behaving as if they're psychopaths. Because the essence of a psychopath is you have no empathy. And you're watching her choke, and yet you're continuing to choke her. So think about who are now the major sex educators of our kids. It is basically a group of men in Los Angeles, in a very small area, who have colonized the world sexually. This is American colonization, economic colonization, cultural colonization, and now sexual colonization. A small group of men in America determining the sexuality of boys all over the world. Because this is not their sexuality, this is the pornographers. So then, as I was writing my book, Pornland, and I'm watching all this pornography, I'm thinking, what would my son have felt like when he was 12 years old and put porn into Google and come up with this? Because what do you think the 12-year-old boy thinks he's going to get? Maybe breasts, maybe a naked woman. Do you think for 1 minute the 12-year-old boy thinks he's going to get gagging? Of course he doesn't. So the question becomes, why does he stay on the site? Why doesn't he go running and screaming to a parent saying, "Look what I've seen"? Well, then I started to read what was on the sites, and it's very clever. So let me read this for you. This is on a site called Gag Me and Fuck Me, popular site. And this is very, very clever. So if you read it in Polish, I want to bring your attention to the bit that says, "We take gorgeous young bitches and do what every man would really like to do." Now think how clever this is. He's 12 years old. He's developing his sense of himself as masculine in this culture. They're telling him, you want to join this club we call men? This is your entry fee. Porn is the way you become a man. It is your rite of passage into masculinity. And what is your 12-year-old boy going to do? Say, "I don't want this, I'm not man enough for this"? So he is being dragged into a hyper-masculinity based on cruelty and torture of women, not one he chose. One he is being reeled in like you reel a fish in. Now, let's think about this 12-year-old boy, because my boy was 12 at one point. Let's think about his arousal, and he's masturbating. So he thinks this is what he wants, but he's also ashamed. He's also fearful. He also feels terrible about himself. So he has a toxic stew in his stomach of arousal, fear, shame, self-loathing. You are traumatizing that 12-year-old boy, because this is not what he thought he was going to get. And he is basically cementing that trauma with his erect penis and his ejaculation. Now, think how brilliant this is as a business plan. Because when you are traumatized, if you do not deal with that trauma, what do? You go back to the place at which you were traumatized again and again and again in the hope that you will have a different ending. But it's never a different ending. It just digs the trauma deeper into the brain, which Don will talk about later. So what are you building in the 12-year-old boy? You're building pathways to addiction. This is brilliant, right? The more you traumatize him, the more he's likely to become a habitual user of porn. And believe me, a 12-year-old boy looking at those images is going to be traumatized. Another very popular act is anal sex. Now, in porn, anal sex is meant to deliver to the woman the message of just what a filthy, dirty slut she really is. It is pounding anal sex. I mean pounding. So much that one of the big problems for women who work in porn is that their anuses drop out of their body. They're constantly having to have their anuses sewn back in. Anal prolapses. Now again, I want you to read the promotional copy that goes with the film, Anally Ripped Whores. All right, you're 12 years old. What are you going to do with this? Where are you going to go with this when you're being told that this is what's fun? This is what makes you a man. So the standard porn movie is one woman and 3 men. She's being orally, anally, and vaginally pounded away. They're spitting in her face, they're pulling her hair, they're calling her a bitch and a whore, and the final scene, the money shot, is all 3 ejaculate on her face. And when you watch this, at the end, she is exhausted. She's lying there, and you can see she doesn't know what to do with herself. She's got ejaculate dripping all over her. Her body is swollen all over, her anus, her vagina, her mouth, everything. Because I'm not watching it with arousal. If you watch porn without an erection, you see the violence for what it is. It's the erection that stops men from seeing the violence that porn is. And porn is a form of sexual cruelty that is socializing an entire generation of boys into losing empathy with women, into losing the capacity for intimacy. We know from studies that the earlier you use porn and the more you use porn, the less capacity you have when you grow up to develop connected, intimate relationships with women. And I have to tell you that, again, as a mother and as a feminist and as a scholar, but mainly as a mother, I know that my son was not born a porn user. He was not born a rapist. He was not born a batterer. He was not born a pimp or a John. But this culture has trained him to be all of those things. And it took us, a pro-feminist family who defined masculinity in a different way, to protect our son from that culture that wanted his soul that wanted to take his morality as a human being. And I'm talking about sexual morality in a different way now. I don't mean it in a religious way. I mean that we are sexual beings with boundaries and bodies and borders. And when I say to my students, who are college students, imagine you're dating a man who's 18, 19, and you've been out on a few dates and he makes no attempt to have sex with you. And you decide to make the first move. So you either touch him or you do something, and he turns round and he says to you, you know what? I really like you, but I'm not yet ready for a sexual relationship. What would you do? And you know what my female students do? They laugh. They say he'd be gay, of course, because they can't imagine a man who would have sexual integrity. And that's what I say to them. Look how low the bar is we have set for men. That any man with a sense of sexual integrity, you throw the homophobic slur at them. Because men are not meant to have sexual integrity. You define masculinity in terms of how many women you can fuck. That is the way you define it. That is terrible for men, and it's terrible for women as well. So much of this is redefining masculinity away from cruelty and away from hypersexualization towards connection and intimacy. You want to help your boys? That's how you do it. You help your boys, you help your girls as well. You help your boys and you help your girls, you shift the culture. That's what happens. We know the women in porn get awful diseases, as this is the AIDS, this is the actual testing that used to test all of the actors who have now closed down this organization. It lists things like chlamydia of the anus, gonorrhea of the eye, anal prolapses. These are diseases that you get if you're in porn. Now, what's the future? Let me tell you, I have studied pornography for 25 years. I did not predict this. If somebody would have told me 15 years ago that you could put porn into Google and come up with anally ripped whores or gag me and fuck me, I would have said, don't be ridiculous. People aren't going to stand by and let the pornographers hijack the sexuality. Of course not. I would have been wrong. Where are the adults? Where are the pediatricians? Where are the educators? Where are all of those who care about children? How have we stood by and let pornography become the major form of sex ed in the world? How has this happened? We have been asleep at the wheel. And as we have been asleep at the wheel, the pornographers have come in and they have taken our kids. And you know what? It's only going to get worse. This is an interview with a porn director. And he himself says they can't produce hardcore stuff enough for the fans because the fans are so desensitized. Because what you want at 12 bores you at 15. And what you want at 15 bores you at 20. And at 25 and 30, remember, boys are now making 5, 10, 15, 20, 30-year relationships with porn. You're going to want to different things as you develop. You're going to want more hardcore stuff. And again, Donnie's going to explain why this happens. But let's just get a glimpse into the future. This is a very important legal decision in the United States. Ashcroft versus Free Speech Coalition, 2002. The Free Speech Coalition, which is the lobbying arm of the porn industry, told the Ashcroft Supreme Court that the 1996 Child Pornography Prevention Act, which said you couldn't use women who looked under 18 or who were under 18, was too limiting for their free speech. And the Supreme Court of the United States of America decided they were right. You should be able to use women who look under 18. And overnight, teen porn grew. Suddenly, you got images like this. First time with Daddy. Daddy's whore. Don't worry, she's my stepdaughter. Overnight, this expanded. Now, let me tell you what's happening now. And this is very hard to get your head around. So we think of men who prefer sex with women as non-pedophiles, and then we think of pedophiles. Am I right? Men who have sex with children. We now have a new type of man, a non-pedophile man who's raping children. I know because I've interviewed them in Connecticut State Prison. So how do we know they're not pedophiles? We know for a number of reasons. Number one, they never touch a child till they're in their 30s or 40s. Anyone who follows the life career of a pedophile knows they start offending around the ages of 14, 15. When I interviewed these men, they were all in their 40s and 50s. They were all in prison for downloading child porn, and they were then taken between 6 months and a year from downloading child porn to raping a child. And I said to them, "Are you pedophiles?" And they said, "No, of course we're not." And they were insulted. I said, "Well, you are in prison for raping a child." They said, "No, but we prefer sex with adult women." So I said to them, "Then why did you rape a child?" And you know what they said to me? "We got bored." They were bored. Why not? And they got hold of child porn because they got bored with regular porn. And they kept saying to me, "These whores in porn, they're disgusting. I wanted something innocent, something different." Well, their granddaughters and their daughters were right there upstairs. All of them had offended against someone living in their own home. So now you have expanded the number of men who are dangerous to children. Before, it was those things we called pedophiles. We had a very clear definition. Now, any man is a potential rapist of child. Not a pedophile, a rapist of children. Why? Because he gets bored. And then the havoc that this creates in those children's lives. Just think about that for a minute. This is a new world we are living in. A world that I, as somebody who has studied pornography for 25 years, never thought we would get to. The pornographers are not finished now. I was an expert witness for the Department of Justice 2 years ago in the Free Speech Coalition versus the Honourable Eric Holder. This was over a law called 2257. 2257 is the law that says that the pornographers have to keep on file documentation that everyone on the porn set is 18 or above. The pornographers said, "You know what? This is too cumbersome, too much for our free speech." And they have been fighting to get rid of 2257. So my question to you is this. Why do they not want to have to prove that everyone on the porn set is 18 or above? Who do you think they're looking at? Children, okay? And I'm going to tell you, Eastern Europe is going to be the place they're going to come, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. So what do we do with this porn monster? Well, to basically get rid of any predatory industry, and this is what pornography is, it is a predatory industry, there is not one answer. You tie down the monster, much like Gulliver. Education by education, regulation by regulation. You go after it every way you can, just after like they did with the tobacco industry and like they did with the alcohol industry. You're never going to come up with one thing. We come at it from every way. So let's look at the Gulliver strategy. Well, one answer is you buy my book, and it's in Polish. Do you have copies? Okay, we have copies. There's also a documentary, which I'm leaving in Poland, based on the book, which hopefully will get translated. And then there's the opt-in, opt-out model, which I'm not going to talk about because that's going to be talked about later in the United Kingdom. And then there is an amazing thing that happened in the United States of America, which is good news for us and terrible news for you in Eastern Europe. Right, so who knew? The AIDS Healthcare Foundation in Los Angeles came up with Measure B. And Measure B says that you basically have to have condoms. Now, is there any other job where you go to work and you're swimming in feces, saliva, semen, urine, and blood, and you're not protected? But on the porn set, there is all those things. And nobody ever thought to protect these women or men from potential disease. except the AIDS Healthcare Foundation in Los Angeles came up with this idea. And this passed last year. The porn industry in the United States is going nuts. Why? Because they don't want condoms. And now it's going to get even worse, because OSHA, which is the health and safety organization in the United States, is actually suggesting that women on the set wear eye goggles so they stop getting gonorrhea of the eye when they ejaculate in the eye. This is how ridiculous everything's becoming. Instead of looking at the obvious thing, which is going after the industry and closing it down, they want them to wear eye goggles, they want to give them dental dams. I mean, the whole thing is insane, okay? But the interesting thing is, this is going to mean, with this regulation, that the porn industry is going to stop production in the United States, okay? It's going to be too highly regulated. So what do? You look for new places to produce that are not regulated. And remember, you want white women. So you need to find a place where you have lots of white women who are poor. Anyone got any idea where they're going to come? Eastern Europe is going to be the new mecca of porn production. Because they're not going to go to Asia, because really most men want white women. And this is going to reshift production centers of porn. And that is really important to understand in Eastern Europe, because they're looking at Eastern Europe. And I've been looking on the free porn sites, more and more porn I can see is coming from Eastern Europe. The women don't speak English. The English subtitles and non-English stuff is written clearly by non-English speakers. Now, another method is the public health approach to stop this. I run a group called Culture Reframed. My group, a non-profit, is called Culture Reframed, and our tagline is solving the public health crisis of the digital age. We believe pornography is the public health crisis of the digital age. So how do you do a public health campaign? You bring to the table all the groups that are concerned about the well-being of children. And these will include educators, medical professionals, community leaders, parents group, lawyers, youth workers, therapists, and activists. And you develop programs. The first program we're going to develop, which will be live at the end of the year, is a web-based program for parents on how to talk to your children about pornography. When I go and lecture in the United States, and I'm sure here, if I go to social workers, pediatricians, lawyers, they come into the lecture at 9 a.m. as lawyers and as pediatricians. By 9:15, they're all parents. Can't get them to think about law or pediatrics. All they can think about is their kid at home on the computer. How many of you are thinking about the same thing right now? Think about your kid at home putting porn into Google. Think about what it's doing to him. What we're going to do is build a whole program for parents to tell you how you do it without blaming or shaming. The kid has enough shame in there. You don't need to add to it. He needs to understand that he is a victim of this industry, not a victimizer. I know that boys are worth better than this. I know this because my son is worth better than this. And if my son is worth better than this, then I bet your sons are worth better than this. And so this has to be a program where we take away the blame and the shame, and we allow our boys to develop a healthy sexuality that makes sense to who they are, to the men that they will become, the people they will become, to their life experiences, not a sexuality forced on them by a group of psychopathic creeps living in Los Angeles. That's not the sexuality we want for our children. Now, the second program we're going to build is for therapists and health educators, because most therapists and health educators do not know what to do with all the kids that are filling their offices that are the victims of porn as either habitual users or have been raped by boys who use porn. So let's ask ourselves to project into the future. What kind of men do you think boys are going to be who were reared on violent porn? What kind of fathers are they going to be? What kind of politicians? What kind of lawyers? What kind of husbands? What kind of teachers? Just think, if you have been reared on hardcore porn and lost the capacity for intimacy, who are you going to be as an adult male? And then, because we've laid waste to an entire generation of boys, which is what the pornography industry is doing, we then lay waste to an entire generation of girls. And when you lay waste to the boys and you lay waste to the girls, what have you done to the culture? Project into the future. If we allow the pornographers to continue, then think of the world that we are going to live in. And I can tell you, as someone who studies media, there is no way this is not reshaping and reframing the entire sexual template of not just the Western world, but now any boy with a cell phone is downloading porn. So to end, I want to say, this is a huge fight. This is not easy. We are fighting the interests of global capital. And I don't know if anyone knows this, but global capital doesn't fold easily when you fight them. They fight back. But what choices do we have? And when I was on a Canadian radio station, at the end of the interviewer said to me, Gail Dines, he said, are you not pushing a boulder up a hill? And I said, of course I'm pushing a boulder up a hill. But that's what you do to make the world livable. The feminist movement pushed a boulder up a hill to make women's lives livable. The labour movement pushes boulder up hills to make workers' lives livable. The civil rights movement pushed a boulder up a hill to make black people's lives livable. That's what you do. You push boulders up hills. This is a huge boulder. There's no question there. But together, as a group, we can push that boulder up this hill. Now, one country has to have the guts to be the first country to do something about pornography. And I mean something bold and something courageous. So I'm going to throw out to you, in Poland, a competition. I've got to bet out that the first country is probably going to be either Iceland, Norway, or Sweden. It could be Poland. The question is, are you going to let Iceland, Norway, and Sweden beat you to be bold and courageous? Or are you going to stand up in Poland, and are you going to make the courageous decision that your children matter more than the pornography industry, that your future is dependent on the health and well-being of your children, and that these predators are out to get your children, and that Polish children matter more than the predators that run the porn industry? These are questions you have to ask, and the questions you have to ask now, because we're about to lay waste to this generation. Are we going to save the next generation from these predators? These are questions that countries are going to have to ask themselves, and I am delighted to be here in Poland to see that this is a question that you are grappling with. This takes enormous political courage, often the amount of courage that a lot of politicians don't have. So you are going to have to make them have that courage. It's the people that force the politicians to have the courage. That's always how social change happens. So my question is, are you going to do it? Thank you.